The headlines, they have been filled with tragedy lately, with the apparent suicides of at least 3 friends or family members of mass shooting victims. Even years later, people are still scrambling to wrap their heads around the aftermath in Newtown, Connecticut and Parkland, Florida.
So recently, the Florida House even advanced a bill allowing armed teachers in schools, to the dismay of several speakers who were very outspoken against such a measure.
Yeah, so joining us today, we've got friend of the show, clinical psychologist Dr. John Duffy, to help us kind of digest all these latest events. Hi, Dr. Duffy.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for coming back and chatting with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So clearly, with all these recent suicides, I mean, I think people need more long-term support. Do you feel like PTSD is a bit marginalized?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that people need more long-term support. That's one thing we're realizing is the next headline doesn't mean that people stopped suffering from the last headline, you know, so we need to keep that in mind. PTSD is not only a marginalized disorder, I don't think we understand it very well, right?
Yeah.
So we think it's like, okay, this is going to affect the people like who were there, who were either shot or witnessed something. But I see this ripple effect that goes through the community, sometimes through the entire country. I have worked with kids who have suffered PTSD in the wake of a Parkland shooting, for example. So I think we need to pay attention to, like, you know, what's the nature of this disorder? We know that there's a man up in Newtown, took his life the other day. He was an activist. He was really seemed like he was honoring the loss of his child, you know, and it seemed like, okay, he's going to be okay, but he was suffering PTSD and he took his life. There was a girl down in Florida who was suffering from just that survivor's guilt that so many people suffer, right? And wondering, like, why me? Why did I make it through? And she also took her life. So these things, these disorders that we think are so discrete and clear, they can be really fuzzy, right? You know, in terms of how we define them and what they look like.
Yeah, and you always say, and people always say, you know, if you are experiencing this, go get help. But as a friend or family member of someone that you see these signs in, like, what can we be doing?
Yeah. So one question we ask sometimes is like, are you okay? You know, and we think like, well, that's the right question to ask. And it is, but we need to dig a little deeper than that too. We need to ask, like, you know, have you felt suicidal? Have you, how have you felt depression? What symptoms have you felt that have really affected you? And it's okay to ask those questions. I think a lot of us parents especially are reluctant to suggest that to our kids for fear, like, oh man, this is gonna put that thought in their head. That's not been my experience.
Well, Dr. Duffy, let's talk about the difference between a PTSD and these emotions in adults versus children. What if children aren't at the age where they can verbalize how they're feeling?
Yeah, we expect, I think, PTSD and depression to look the same kind of across the age span. They do not. I mean, in kids, sometimes you'll see this exuberance. They'll seem upbeat and happy. Sometimes they'll just have these moments where they spike with negative behavior. Sometimes they'll have sleep problems. So you can't really tell by looking that, okay, this child is suffering from PTSD. There was a girl recently, I posted about this. She took her life. And there was no visible signs. Her parents laid out like everything that had gone on in her life. She was engaged socially. She was engaged in her family. She was doing well in school. She was involved in extracurricular activities. And not until she took her life did her parents realize, wow, in her journals, she really outlines all the suffering she'd gone through. So the profile we think matches PTSD and depression no longer holds.
Yeah, that's a very scary thing. As scary, equally as scary as we look, because it's the world we're in now. The Florida House passes a bill that allows teachers in the state of Florida to carry weapons.
Yes.
Do you see this working in the state of Illinois? Is this the right conversation to be having, or is there a larger takeaway?
I understand the conversation because I think we want to be able to do something in the school in real time. So I get the idea. Research would suggest this isn't a great idea. So I like the idea of taking a big step back and thinking long range about, like, what's really going to prevent this stuff from happening going into the future. So I propose, and I have for the last couple of years, social emotional learning as a mandated course for even very young kids to understand their emotional well-being, the emotional well-being of others, and warning signs. And I think prevention lies in that, in really understanding the emotional lives
Getting
of
ahead
ourselves.
of it. I mean, that path goes a long way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The point is to get ahead of it instead of always trying to catch up, right? And that's what I feel like we are perpetually doing.
Yeah.
Dr. Duffy, we always wish we had more time with you.
Seriously,
There's so much to talk about with these topics. Yeah.
It's so true.
So for more info and tips, you guys can head over to drjohnduffy.com and also be sure to check out his podcast called Better. He does it every week.